Good morning, great souls. Welcome to our Monday morning New Path book study and meditation. We had a wonderful meditation and celebration for Mahad Samadhi yesterday evening. We'll do a prayer today as usual, and we'll play O Master, which we played last night at the Mahad Samadhi if you attended. But just as we're in Mahasamadhi kind of season, yesterday Yogananda's Mahasamadhi celebration, and on Tuesday Shri Yukteswar's. So let's close the eyes, feel the blessings of the masters, and let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters of self-realization, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Shri Yukteswar, our beloved Guru Deva Paramahansa Yogananda, friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, saints of all religions, all paths, we lovingly bow at thy feet. O beloved Master, bless this satsang, bless our lives, that we may be in tune with thee, that we may be perfect channels of thy divine light, and help you to spread your vibration of love, wisdom, bliss, peace throughout the world. Om, peace. Amen. Okay, let's have O Master now.
the storms above the pain, a land where peace and laughter reign. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Guide all our hopes and all our dreams, past every goal that only seems, into the light, the inner sun, into the truth that we're all one. Help us to find in every hour, in every thought, in every thought, a joy that spans eternity, the truth that makes us ever free. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Guide all our hope, oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways.
And let's just keep the eyes closed for a moment. Let's take the hands and just place them at the point where the medulla oblongata is, that the back of the head where the little dent is. Let's put the fingers in as we do for energization. 3 one way, 3 another way. And then place, keeping that right finger hand behind and the left on the spiritual eye, and just feel the energy being drawn from the medulla up to the spiritual eye. And then bring the hands down, and let's just meditate here for a moment, bringing all of your attention to that point between the eyebrows, the spiritual eye, offering ourselves into this point. And just feel as we sit here in meditation just for a few moments, feel that you're offering your entire life, your entire being to Yogananda, to Paramahansa Yogananda, this infinite consciousness. Offering all your fears, your doubts, all your attachments, habits, good and bad, karma, good and bad, likes and dislikes. All of your weaknesses, all of your strengths, every part of your life, offering to Master now, along with your love, as we open the heart consciously wider, drawing that energy up to the spiritual eye. Om, peace, amen. Okay, so today, my friends, we are continuing on with chapter 18. It's not too much more to go, and let's carry on. So just, it's page 189, the last paragraph is where we'll pick up from.
My greatest help at this time, apart from Master himself, was Reverend Bernard. Bernard was the alternate minister at our Hollywood church. He had a brilliant mind and a clear understanding of the teachings. Fortunately for me, he seemed to enjoy answering my questions. Less fortunately, I hadn't as many opportunities to be with him as my searching mind would have liked. I sought answers alternately wherever I could find them. One of the monks, a young man with the improbable name of Daniel Boone, was friendly, loquacious, and willing to share with me not only the teachings he had received from Master, but anything else he might have stumbled upon during years of metaphysical reading. In fact, he suffered from what Master described as metaphysical indigestion. I was too new on the path to realize that Boone's seeming strength was actually his greatest weakness. But the more I pondered his answers, the more I began to suspect some of them of fallibility. Didn't Master say that? I would challenge him. Only if he said yes would I accept without question whatever he told me. A more reliable, if less erudite, aide was Norman. A veritable giant, Norman had a heart almost as big as his body. It inspired me to see the intensity of his love for God. Not at all interested in the theoretical aspects of the path, he understood everything in terms of devotion. God was to him simply his divine friend. He required no intellectual explanations to clarify his perception of God's love for him and of his for God. I don't know any of those things, he would exclaim with a gentle smile. Whenever I posed to him some philosophical conundrum, I just know that I love God. How I envied him his childlike devotion. Even Master was touched by it. And how I longed to be able to still my own questioning mind, which from habit demanded answers that it already knew full well were not the wisdom I craved. For I knew that love was the answer, not knowledge, not intellectual acumen. Love was the highest wisdom. More and more, I struggled to progress on the fragrant pathway of devotion. Another aid to me in those days was an older man named Jean Haupt. Jean, true to his Germanic heritage, had extraordinary willpower. He was determined to find God in the shortest time possible. Whenever he wasn't working, he meditated. One weekend, his meditation lasted 40 hours without a break. It seemed more like 40 minutes, he told me, with a quiet smile. I worked on the grounds with Jean and Norman, gardening, plastering, and doing whatever odd jobs were required. Jean, though 55 years old and little more than half Norman's size, could do more work than Norman and I combined. If he saw Norman struggling too long at some heavy job, one time it was carrying a refrigerator up the stairs, Jean would mutter impatiently, "Here, let me do it." Moments later, the job would be done. I was as deeply impressed by his willpower and as anxious to emulate it as by Norman's devotion. The most attractive feature of my new quarters was a small basement, reached by a set of narrow steps at the far end of the room from the door. This basement at once housed the motor which pulled cable cars up the steep mountainside. It seemed ideal for a meditation room. I carted out piles of rubble that had accumulated over decades of neglect, constructed a trap door for the opening to ensure virtual silence, and soon was devoting all my free time to meditating in this, my quote, Himalayan cave, as I thought of it. Over the ensuing months, I put in a ceiling, painted the room a soothing dark blue, and found everything here that a young yogi could possibly desire in the way of silence, remoteness from the demands of daily life, and tranquility. My first evening at Mount Washington Reverend Bernard visited me in my room. Master wants me to give you instruction in the art of meditation, he said. He taught me an ancient yoga technique of concentration and added some general counsel. When you aren't practicing this concentration technique, try to keep your mind focused at the point between the eyebrows. This is called the Christ center because when Christ consciousness is attained, one's awareness becomes centered here. Would it help, I asked, to keep my mind focused there all day long as well? Very much. When Master lived in his Guru's ashram, he practiced keeping his mind fixed there all the time. And another thing, Bernard added, this is also the seat of the spiritual eye. The more deeply you concentrate your gaze at this point, the more you'll become aware of a round light forming there, a blue field with a bright golden ring around it and a silvery white 5-pointed star in the center. This isn't just a subjective experience, I inquired. Does everybody see it? Everybody, he assured me, provided his mind is calm enough. It's a universal reality, like the fact that we all have brains. Actually, the spiritual eye is the astral reflection of the medulla oblongata at the base of the brain. I'll tell you more about that some other time. For now, suffice it to say that energy enters the body through the medulla, and that by the sensitive application of willpower, one can actually increase this energy flow. The Christ center is the body's seat of willpower and also of concentration. Notice how, whenever you concentrate deeply or strongly will something to happen, your mind is drawn automatically to this point. You may even tend inadvertently to frown a little in the process. By concentration on the Christ center, your willpower will increase. Consequently, the amount of energy flowing in through the medulla oblongata increases also. And with this greater flow, the spiritual eye forms naturally in the forehead. Through concentration on the spiritual eye, the consciousness gradually becomes attuned to the subtle rate of vibration of this light. At last, one's consciousness, too, takes on the quality of light. That is what Jesus meant when he said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Footnote, Matthew 6:22. Modern translators, unaware of the hidden significance of this passage, have changed the word single in the King James Version to read sound or clear. The New English Bible even changes eye to eyes, thus, if your eyes are sound. One wonders how often the scriptures have been tampered with by scholars who, though intellectually learned, are steeped in spiritual ignorance. So back to the text. Bernard continued, it is in this purified state of awareness that ecstasy comes. After Bernard left me, I sat a while practicing the techniques he had taught me. Later on, I went out of doors and stood above the tennis courts again, this time gazing out over a vast carpet of twinkling lights. How lovely in the evening was this huge, bustling city. I reflected that those myriad lights were manifestations of the same divine light, which I would someday behold in deep meditation within myself. But electricity, I told myself, provides light only for the pathways of this world. The divine luminescence lights pathways to the infinite. Lord, I prayed, though I stumble countless times, I will never stop seeking thee. Lead my footsteps ever onward toward thine infinite light.
Okay. I always struggle a little bit on Monday mornings with my broadcasting. I always get a little bit confused with what's broadcasting where and when. And also what I really notice as well, just these are on mundane levels, but just read it, always listening to this text in this environment of us live together. No matter how much I've prepared, I always new things come to me to share. I don't know if it's the case for you, if you've read it before we come into this. When we listen to it together, there's some sort of power that comes through. Anyway, lots that we could draw from as usual. One of the things that really came up for me in this particular reading was just this point that Yogananda, that Swami Kriyananda touches on, is just this point where many people kind of can draw wisdom or seeming wisdom from lots of different paths. Indeed, it is wisdom. But when you're drawing from many different paths, it can create a conflicting cross current that kind of goes against itself. And Master would say that you can't have your feet in two boats, and that it's better to dive deep on one path. Now, this doesn't mean that each of these paths does not have valid truth to them. It's very easy just to, on a very subtle level, to have a point that might seem not that it's too much of a conflict, but in the mind it just plants a seed of doubt, and that doubt can really create confusion, especially as we tread into on the spiritual path, especially as we tread into the more murky waters of delusions and karmic bombs and challenges. It's easy for these things that might at first not seem like there's too much of a difference, but as we traverse that path, it really can cause quite a challenge. And so again, Master came to show the universality of all religions, of all true paths, but he also said that the first law of God is loyalty. And this can be a challenge for people in the beginning, especially, that it kind of seems like it's a rule not to explore, different teachings, etc. It kind of seems like it's, a bit restrictive, a bit controlling, and it just kind of speaks to where people are at. There's a definite place in your path where you're exploring lots of different things, and that's incredibly valid. But Master, and what Swami is really speaking to here in this chapter, is that when you find the path that is yours, when you're at that moment, then really dive richly in that. And that loyalty will bring a sense of growth and depth that won't come from exploring lots of different paths. Doesn't mean you can't read a quote and be inspired, or have a friend who follows a different path and be in awe of a certain practice or a process that they're going through. It doesn't mean that. It just means there is a real power in drilling deeply in one particular teaching. So just touching on that, in all the things that I seem to be sharing at the moment, the big thing that the new path, whispers from eternity, meditation, etc., and all these different ways in which Raja Yoga, Kriya Satsang, the thing that seems to be coming up for me at the moment is just devotion and the heart. And, it's so warming to hear the story of Norman and his simple devotion. And I can relate to it. I've always said that I'm not a learned or avid reader and intellectual. It's not my forte. It's not my strength. I find it kind of strange that I'm doing a book study, but I'm following my heart in that, and the new path speaks to my heart. But I do feel that there's many other people that could explain and talk about it in a much more thorough and intellectual way. But but I so relate with Norman here. Just, the teachings, all of the kind of philosophical discussions. Sometimes they're a little too much for me. I just want to know how to love God and how for God, how to receive that love from God. But what's also inspiring here is just seeing once again Swami Kriyananda drawing inspiration from everything that he's getting, just pulling out the wisdom and the ability to get to the heart of the matter. Because not only is he inspired by Norman's devotion, but he is inspired by Jean Hope's willpower. And so rather than being jealous of these things, he is just drawing, okay, well, that's what I want to develop. I want to develop devotion. I want to develop willpower. And equally, you could really say that Swami is a master in both of those things. Of course, he's passed from the body now, but, so devotional, and yet in the beginning, such a dry intellectual by his own admission. This is not something I am judging or coming to through my own conclusion, but only through his own assessment of himself. And yet he developed himself. And this really is something, and this is what is really coming through for me, is just Swami's ability to go to the heart and drill into what is it that I can take from these experiences, these people, this situation, and how can I deepen my spiritual path, following my guru Paramahansa Yogananda, following the teachings of self-realization. And so he's drawing through his friends devotion, willpower. He takes that devotion. He knows it's something that is so important for him to develop, and he takes the steps to develop that devotion. So he's using the intellectual mind that he has quite naturally to kind of draw from the teachings, but then he has the good sense and wisdom to actually apply steps into creating the goal being reached on whatever area he chooses to focus on. And he focuses on many areas. So with devotion, he took time to really chant. He knew that he meditated. He was very strong in his meditation, morning and evening, Saturday meditation. We'll hear a little bit more about in the next chapter, but he's taking a longer meditation on a Saturday, but he's also as well, and he doesn't touch on it so much in this. He touches on it, but not as much as we hear from other disciples and founding members of Ananda. But I always remember Ananda, Naiswami Dhyana sharing about Swami Kriyananda. I can't remember where they were, in fact. I think it was San Francisco, but I'm really not sure. And it was kind of at nighttime. Swami, it may have been out at a special event, and they were kind of next to each other with rooms were adjoining. I'm not quite sure where the location was. But Diana shared how deeply touched she was by hearing Swami chanting at night, and he would chant so deeply that he would be weeping, and she would be able to hear his weeping, and just how disciplined he was to take this area that was a weakness within him, devotion, and top heavy with intellectual kind of a focus. And he really took the steps every day. And of course, we'll find out later in the book that he kind of was, a little bit pleased with his progress. I've done well. And then Yogananda, he's told by a disciple, Yogananda said, "See how I've changed Donald Waters. See how I've changed water, and just in that trusting that if we take the steps to develop the areas that we are weak in, and we do our best with devotion and do it with the teachings, we can change and transform our lives." So Swami, when he did this, when he developed this chanting, this wasn't a week of chanting. I mean, this was an ongoing commitment. And so for ourselves, we may want to look at the areas that we are weaker in on our spiritual path, and we can develop that. Now, Swami, in those early days, he had more time to himself, but quite quickly, I think in a matter of months, 6 months, maybe, within a year, he is being given more and more responsibility. But still, his depth of practice was very strong. And so look for ourselves what we can do. So he could do it for a long amount of time in that beginning stages. Now, maybe in the pandemic, we've got more time to develop those things, but maybe not. But maybe also there'll be times when you can develop more time on those areas, and other times when you've got to cut back. But what Swami did was he was consistent and diligent in developing those aspects. So taking this week a time to look for yourself, what can I develop, and what can I do every day, even if it's 5 minutes. Imagine 5 minutes of chanting every day, more than you would typically do, or 5 days of 5 minutes of saying an affirmation that develops a quality you're weaker in, or 5 minutes of prayer that you are praying that you change a certain aspect within yourself. Find this week, today, after this particular session, what can I develop and deepen within myself? What else to say here? I mean, we worked a little bit with the meditation with the spiritual eye. It just kind of highlights for ourselves again, bringing the attention to the spiritual eye. Swami could pull out that wisdom from the autobiography, from the teachings, that the very little teachings that he'd come across. He was able to pull out that question, would it help to bring my focus there? I mean, just amazing. So for ourselves, often we are very mentally engaged in our lives. We have a lot of things online, we have conversation. It can be quite challenging to bring the attention to this point in our daily lives. But maybe take a moment after class today, or even now as we speak, but just when are the areas that you could focus like that? Maybe it's washing the dishes or putting them in the dishwasher. Maybe it's going for, having your morning shower or brushing your teeth. Maybe, just look for yourself. Where can I actually spend the time of bringing my attention there? And just do it very deeply at those times in your day, even if it's just once a week or twice a week. But do it with intensity, enjoyment, devotion, a relaxed intensity. Just really find for yourself that. And then as you start to enjoy that, you'll naturally maybe want to find other moments throughout your week to bring your attention to that spiritual eye. And this is just a great way of coming to the teachings about different aspects, this new path. And so it's a great time to really look within your own meditation practice. Am I drawing my attention to the spiritual eye as deeply as I can be? Am I, focusing on, not necessarily focusing on developing your willpower, but once again, understanding that the spiritual eye is the seat of the will. And this point of the medulla oblongata, that we know. We work with it every day with energization exercises and maybe other practices as well. But just, in this up and coming week, really tuning into drawing more energy in, bringing the focus up to the spiritual light, bathing the brain in light, and just letting go. And just, that key of what was shared at that point by Bernard, but is just in that very stillness that the spiritual eye appears. And so taking that time to really feel that stillness in communion after we've practiced the techniques. Oftentimes we might do our kriyas and we don't leave enough time to really commune. When we commune, when we can lengthen that time for communing, then that's when that deep stillness can come into place. The techniques, of course, it can come in at any point in the techniques, but they're also somewhat active. That communion is an opportunity for that stillness to really flow into our lives, and of course, focus at the spiritual eye. And then just to say, I mean, the point that came to me just very briefly is the Himalayan cave, Swami making the most of his surroundings and turning it into a meditation cave. It reminds me a little bit of when I was in the monastery. I lived in various places, but in my kind of last weeks of being in the monastery, I remember I was just moved into the Kriya Sangha to serve there, and we were very full, and my mum was visiting at that time for an extended stay, and my room was separate to the monastery, whereas everyone else was in the monastery. So I was able to give her my room because it wasn't part of the monastery as such. But then I went up into the monastery itself, into that building, and there was a little cubby hole above the pantry, and that's where I slept and did some of my meditations. We also had a group meditation, but I really thoroughly enjoyed just having that time to be in a space like that and sleep there. I was just so enthusiastic that that was what was going. That was where I was, and this was, it kind of helped me tune into these moments that Swami was going through in the new path. And then finally, just to mention, when I still do this practice. I do it slightly different now, but from the teachings, I take whatever's deeply inspiring, and I used to write it down in a particular book. I still have that book. Now I kind of write it on, what do you call them? They're kind of flashcards, and I put them by my altar, and I just sometimes find that easier to search through. But I remember distinctly writing down these last lines, this prayer that Swami said at the very end of this chapter. Lord, I prayed, though I stumble countless times, I will never stop seeking thee. Lead my footsteps ever onward toward thy infinite light. That was a staple prayer of mine. And in fact, I think it's been a while since I prayed that prayer, and I will start to incorporate it once again. It's so powerful and so true for us that when we take this prayer, what wisdom there is. And we stumble so many times on the path, but the main thing is that we still turn to the Guru, turn to Master, turn to God, and we keep looking at that goal. So have a wonderful week. Practice the spirit, working with the spiritual eye, thinking about when you can practice, when you can maybe bring the attention to the spiritual eye, making sure you're communing enough after meditation, focusing at the spiritual eye, maybe especially more than the other ways that you could commune this week. Looking at the areas that are weak in your spiritual life and figuring out a plan to have a daily plan to strengthen that particular area of weakness. Maybe taking this prayer, Lord, though I stumble countless times, I will never stop seeking thee. Lead my footsteps ever onward toward thy infinite light. Any of these are optional practices that you can bring into the week. Next week, we go into chapter 19, the first days of a neophyte. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and God bless. Jai Guru.